It was supposed to be the most magical day of her life, a perfect fairy tale in the heart of Sydney, a dream meticulously crafted for months. But for 29-year-old Chloe, the fairy tale was about to turn into a nightmare, a horror story broadcast for everyone to see. She'd found the proof of his betrayal, and what she did on the altar was a bloody masterpiece of revenge that no one, not a single soul, was ready for. Chloe ran her hands over her wedding dress, the soft weight of the silk a familiar comfort over her 7-month baby bump. That little bump, once a source of nerves, was now her greatest pride, a constant reminder of the life flourishing inside her. A little girl she'd already named Poppy after a lazy Sunday afternoon spent with her fiancé Lachlan, dreaming of their future. From her childhood bedroom in her folks' place in the leafy suburbs of Mosman, she could see the frantic hustle in the backyard. Fairy lights twinkling in the gum trees, native flowers being arranged, and a final frantic check before the big day dawned in less than 24 hours. Everything felt like a perfectly planned piece of theatre, the final scene of a love story with a happy ending. Lachlan, at 35, was the picture of a perfect bloke, a successful investment banker from the swanky end of the city, with a smile that could disarm a bank robber and a kindness that seemed born into his bones. He treated her like a queen, not with grand, empty gestures, but with the little things that truly mattered. The little post-it note on her pillow, the way his hand always found hers at the cinema, the spark in his eye when he spoke about their future. To Chloe's family, he was more than a son-in-law. He was the answer to their prayers, the man who would finally give their daughter the security and happiness she deserved. At 29, Chloe felt like all the pieces of her life were finally slotting into place. The pregnancy, though not on the cards, was met with a contagious joy from Lachlan. "It's a sign, my love," he'd said, dropping to one knee. Not to propose, he'd already done that, but to kiss her still flat belly. "A sign we were born to build a family together." How could you doubt words said with such conviction? The celebration at her house was a reflection of that collective happiness. Uncles, cousins, old mates from uni, all gathered to raise a glass to the love they saw blossoming. Laughter and music blended into a symphony of pure joy. Chloe watched it all with a serene smile, her hand resting protectively on her Poppy. She felt whole, loved, and safe. It was a fairy tale, and she was the princess about to live out her happily ever after. But even in the prettiest garden, a little seed of doubt can find fertile ground, and that seed was silently being watered in the heart of Chloe's cousin and maid of honor, Bethany. Bethany, with her keen eye and a gut feeling that rarely let her down, saw something that the others, drunk on the happiness of the moment, couldn't. It wasn't anything concrete, just a subtle hunch, a little shiver down her spine every time Lachlan's smile seemed a bit too forced, or his gaze lingered a second longer than it should. She saw the tiny, micro-expressions, the imperceptible hesitations that chipped away at the facade of the perfect groom. Bethany knew that sharing her suspicions without proof would be pure cruelty, an act of sabotage on the eve of the most important day of Chloe's life. Accusing the man her cousin loved, the father of her baby, would be like chucking a bomb into the middle of the party. But staying quiet was eating her alive. She felt like an accomplice to something she couldn't understand, but her instinct screamed was dangerous. That's when an idea, dressed up as a romantic gesture, formed in her mind. She sidled up to Chloe, who was chatting animatedly with an aunt about the nursery. With a sneaky grin, Bethany pulled her aside. "Chloe, I've had an idea, and you are going to love it," she began, her voice full of a carefully planned enthusiasm. "Lachlan's at that swanky penthouse he rented in Manly, yeah? Having his groom's night in peace." Chloe laughed at the formality. "Yeah, he said he needed some space to relax and get his head right. Silly, isn't it? Not silly at all, it's tradition, Bethany corrected, handing her a small velvet box. I bought him a present, a pair of customized cufflinks and this little something for you. I reckon it'd be dead set romantic if you dropped them over to him and told him you're officially a couple of legends. Write him a little card as well, something from the heart, telling him how stoked you are for tomorrow. Can you imagine how much that would mean to him, getting it from you in person just hours before you meet at the altar? It's the sort of story couples tell their grandkids. The suggestion warmed Chloe's heart. It was a proper romantic gesture, a final declaration of love before they became man and wife. She hugged her cousin tight. Beth, that's such a bloody brilliant idea. You always think of everything. He'll absolutely love it. I'm sure he will, Bethany replied, her smile not quite reaching her worried eyes. Go now, before it gets too late. It'll be the perfect surprise. As Chloe headed upstairs, her heart overflowing with love and a buzz of excitement to write the most heartfelt letter of her life, Bethany watched her go. A lump formed in her throat. She didn't want to be right. She prayed her gut feeling for the first time ever was dead wrong. She prayed that Chloe would get to the penthouse, deliver the gift, get a passionate kiss, and come home with the certainty that her fairy tale was real. But deep down, she knew she wasn't just suggesting a romantic gesture. She was handing Chloe the key, not just to the penthouse, but to the truth. And she hoped her cousin had the strength to unlock the door, no matter what she found on the other side. The stage for the biggest twist in Chloe's life wasn't being set in a church, but at that very moment, in a decision that would change everything forever. With her heart thumping, a mix of romantic excitement and the thrill of a well-kept secret, Chloe drove through the streets of Sydney towards Manly. The small velvet box, the new lingerie, and the hastily written card lay on the passenger seat, a silent testament to her love. She imagined Lachlan's face, the genuine surprise, maybe even a little tear of emotion. He'd hug her tight, tell her she was the most incredible woman in the world, and that he couldn't wait for tomorrow. That was the scene playing over and over in her mind, a private film that made her smile to herself in the car. The building where Lachlan had rented the penthouse was a modern, imposing block of flats, a symbol of the success he was so proud of. She waved to the doorman, a familiar face, and took the silent lift to the top floor. The hallway on the 6th floor was carpeted, muffling the sound of her steps and making her heart pound even louder. She stopped in front of the door to apartment 603. For a moment she hesitated. Maybe she should just leave the gift at the door. No, Bethany's idea was about the personal touch, the surprise. She took a deep breath, the smile returning to her lips, and raised her hand to knock, but her hand froze in midair. A sound cut through the solid wood of the door, a sound that didn't belong in her private movie. It was a laugh, a woman's laugh, loud and unrestrained, followed by a man's voice, a voice she knew better than her own. The voice of Lachlan. But it wasn't his happy laugh. It was something more raw, more unguarded. Chloe frowned. He wasn't alone. Maybe a mate, one of the groomsmen, had popped in to keep him company. It was a possibility. But the female laugh didn't sound like a mate's. She took a step back, the confusion beginning to chip away at the certainty that had brought her here. Her gut, that little voice we so often ignore, screamed. Something was wrong. The air seemed to get thicker, harder to breathe. She moved closer to the door, this time not to knock, but to listen. She pressed her ear against the cold wood, her heart now hammering against her ribs with terrifying force. And then she heard it again. This time it wasn't a laugh. It was a moan, a low, intimate, unmistakable sound. A sound that made the blood in Chloe's veins run cold. The floor seemed to vanish beneath her feet. The gift in her hand felt like a lead weight. The card, with its words of eternal love, now felt like a sick joke. Air escaped her lungs in a silent hiss. It couldn't be. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding. Maybe the TV was on, a movie. Yeah, that had to be it. Lachlan liked loud action films, but his voice came next, clear, close, cutting through the air and tearing away Chloe's veil of denial. "Easy, babe, easy, you'll wear me out before the big show." The woman's voice laughed again, a sound that now scratched at Chloe's ears. "And isn't that the point? One last test before the big day." Chloe's world began to crumble. The structure of her fairy tale, built with such care, with so much love, began to crack. Every word they exchanged was a hammer blow to the foundations of her life. Shaking, she pulled her phone from her pocket. Her hands barely obeyed her, her fingers slippery with cold sweat. She didn't know why she was doing it. It was an impulse, a desperate need to prove to herself that she wasn't going insane. She opened the voice recording app and pressed the red button. The silent phone began to capture the demolition of her future. "You're unbelievable," Lachlan's voice said, followed by the sound of a sloppy kiss. "But what about tomorrow? What about the pregnant little bride?" The term "pregnant little bride," said with that tone of utter disdain, hit Chloe like a punch to the gut. She brought her free hand to her belly in a protective gesture, as if to shield her poppy from those vile words. "Oh, Chloe," the woman replied, and the familiarity in her voice sent a new kind of terror shooting down Chloe's spine. She knew that voice, knew it well. "She doesn't need to know. She believes everything you say. She's the perfect little doll for your successful family man display shelf." The silence that followed was filled only by Chloe's ragged breathing and the ringing in her ears. Then Lachlan's voice, the same voice that had promised her the world, that had told her she was his future, uttered the sentence that would seal her fate. "That's exactly why I'm marrying her. The baby gives me the perfect excuse. The family, the image, it all fits. And once the ring is on her finger and my name is on our kid's birth certificate, then my love, I'll have control over everything. The money, the businesses, her life. She'll never have the guts to leave me, not with a kid in her arms. She'll be the perfect docile wife at home, looking after the heir while we keep having fun." The woman finished his thought, her voice laced with a sickly sweetness. "Exactly like we always have." And Chloe felt the bitter taste of bile rise in her throat. The shock was so intense that it manifested as physical pain, a sharp jab in her stomach that made her double over. She leaned against the hallway wall to keep from falling, her phone still recording, her hand still clutching the velvet box. The man she was due to marry in a few hours didn't love her. He saw her as a pawn in his game, a means to an end. The pregnancy wasn't a sign of fate. It was a tool for control. Her love, her dedication, her family, it was all a complete ruse, a stage carefully set for Lachlan's twisted play. And the woman who laughed at her naivety, who called her a doll, who was she? Chloe forced her mind to work, to cut through the fog of pain and betrayal. The voice was so familiar, and then, like a lightning bolt illuminating a scene of horror, she knew. "Just gotta be careful tomorrow, Marcella," Lachlan said. "Act like the maid of honor if you have to. You're a good actress, Marcella." The name exploded in Chloe's mind with the force of a bomb. Marcella, her friend, one of her best mates, the woman who helped her pick out her wedding dress, the woman who organized her baby shower, the woman who would be standing next to her on the altar, holding her bouquet, witnessing her vows. Marcella, who had hugged her just last night, telling her how happy she was for her and Lachlan. The betrayal was already a chasm, but discovering the other woman was someone she trusted, someone she called a friend, turned the chasm into an infinite void that threatened to swallow everything she was. Chloe couldn't breathe anymore. The air in the hallway felt toxic. She stopped the recording, pocketing the phone with a robotic motion. Her body moved on pure survival instinct. She turned and walked back towards the lift, each step a monumental effort. There were no tears. The shock was too deep, the pain too overwhelming, that it had dried up all her reserves. She was an empty shell, a spectator to her own demolition. Inside the lift, she caught her reflection in the mirror. She saw a woman, pale, with wide, empty eyes, clutching a little velvet box. The happy bride from minutes ago had vanished, replaced by this stranger carrying the weight of an unbearable truth. When she reached the ground floor, she walked past the doorman without seeing him. The outside world seemed distant, muffled, as if she were underwater. Sitting in her car in the silent car park, she finally let go of the gift box. It fell onto the passenger seat with a soft thud. Chloe sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring into nothing. The sound of the audio echoed in her mind. Every word, every laugh, every moan seared into her memory. The pain came in waves. First disbelief, then denial. And finally, a cold, razor-sharp fury began to rise from her guts. A fury that wasn't loud or hysterical, but silent, precise and lethal. They called her a doll, a docile little bride. They thought they could control her. They thought she was weak. Lachlan thought the wedding and the baby would be her chains. He couldn't have been more wrong. In that moment, in the silence of her car, with her heart shattered into a million pieces, Chloe felt something new being born inside her, right alongside the life of her daughter. It wasn't despair, it was determination. They wouldn't see her tears. They wouldn't have the satisfaction of watching her crumble. They wanted a show. They were going to get one. But the script was no longer Lachlan's. The script, from that instant on, would be hers, and the final act would be something that no one, absolutely no one, was prepared to see. The drive back home was a blur. The city lights, which had once seemed to celebrate her future, were now just meaningless smudges of colour in a world that had lost all its form. Chloe didn't cry. Tears seemed like a luxury, a release she couldn't afford. The pain was so deep, so absolute, that it transformed into something different. A cold clarity, a sharp lucidity that honed her mind and hardened her heart. The shock had passed, replaced by a terrifying calm, the calm before the perfect storm. She was no longer a dreamy bride, she was a strategist, and the battlefield was her own life. Stepping into her parents' house, the sounds of the pre-wedding party still echoed. But for Chloe, it was like listening to a recording from a distant time, from another life. She managed to force a smile for her mum, who came to meet her with a worried look. "Are you all right, love? You look so pale." "Just a bit knackered, Mum. All the excitement, the pregnancy. I'm going to head up for a rest before dinner," Chloe lied, her voice steady, without a hint of a tremor. The ease with which the lie came to her lips surprised her. It was as if a new part of her, a part she didn't know existed, had taken over. Locked in the safety of her old bedroom, she didn't allow herself to fall apart. She didn't look at the wedding dress hanging on the door, a white ghost of broken promises. Instead, she sat at her old desk, the same place she'd done her homework and written secrets in teenage diaries. She took out her phone, listened to the recording one last time, not to relive the pain, but to solidify her resolve. Every word of Lachlan's, every laugh from Marcella, was fuel for the fire now burning inside her. She deleted the recording from her phone, but not before saving it in 3 different places: in her email, in a cloud storage account, and on a small USB stick she tucked away in the back of a drawer. Proof, evidence, ammunition. Her first phone call wasn't to a friend, or her mum, or to confront the traitor. It was to the man who had always been her rock, her protector. Besides her dad, her godfather, Richard, a shrewd businessman of few words but with an unwavering loyalty to his family. He was also, ironically, one of the first and most significant investors in Lackland's company, having been convinced by Richard himself to back his brilliant future son-in-law. He answered on the second ring. "Chloe, what's happened? Is everything all right with the baby?" "The baby's fine, Rich," she said, her voice low but carrying an urgency that made him fall silent on the other end of the line. "I'm not. I need you to do me a massive favor, and I need you to trust me without asking any questions. At least not yet." There was a pause. Chloe could picture him on the other end, his brow furrowed, his business instincts already on high alert. "I'm listening. I want you to pull every single cent you've invested in Lackland's company, and I want you to do it first thing tomorrow morning. Call the other investors you know, the ones who went in because of you. Tell them you're pulling out, that you've lost confidence in the business. They'll follow your lead. I want you to create a wave of withdrawals. I want his house of cards to start crumbling before he even realizes what's hit him." The silence on the line was heavy. Richard wasn't a man who acted on impulse. His fortune was built on logic, data, and a deep dislike of drama. What Chloe was asking went against every one of his business principles. But she wasn't a business. She was his goddaughter. "Chloe, this is drastic. This could sink his company, sink Lackland. What happened?" "You'll understand everything tomorrow at the church," she replied, her voice as firm as steel. "Until then, all I ask is this. Trust me, for the respect you have for my mum, for the love you've always said you have for me. Please, just do this." She didn't need to say anything else. The seriousness in her voice, the absence of hysteria, the surgical precision of the request, it all told Richard that something fundamental had broken. This wasn't a bride's whim. It was a battle order. "Consider it done," he said at last. "First thing in the morning. No one will know the order came from you. Done." Chloe hung up, a tiny bit of the pressure in her chest easing. The first pillar of Lackland's empire was undermined. Now for the second, the legal pillar. Her next call was to her solicitor, Dr. Helen, a woman known for her ruthless efficiency and discretion. It was nearly 8 p.m., but Chloe knew Helen always answered a client in crisis. "Dr. Helen, it's Chloe. I need an urgent service." "Chloe? I thought at this hour you'd be floating on cloud 9. The wedding's tomorrow, isn't it? Congratulations." "There won't be a wedding," Chloe said, the sentence landing like a stone in the quiet. "At least not a legal one." "I know we've already signed the papers at the registry. The certificate is probably ready to be released after the religious ceremony. I want you to cancel, annul, tear it up. Do whatever you need to do so that legally I am not Lackland's wife. Not for a single second." Dr. Helen, used to a few twists, simply paused before her tone shifted completely. "Understood. This requires immediate action the first minute the registry opens tomorrow. I'll need a justification. A power of attorney from you." "You'll have everything you need," Chloe cut in. "Prepare the paperwork. I'll sign digitally tonight. The justification you'll hear tomorrow, along with the rest of the guests. Just make sure that when the ceremony in the church is over, I walk out of there just as single as I walked in. Don't you worry, Chloe. If you don't want to be married, you won't be. I'll handle everything personally," the solicitor promised, her voice now oozing competence and solidarity. With the two pillars, financial and legal, ready to crumble, Chloe felt a deep exhaustion wash over her body. But there was still the pre-wedding party downstairs. There was her family. There was Marcella, who was surely down there laughing and celebrating the happiness of the friend she was betraying. Chloe had to go down. She had to face the enemy. She looked in the mirror, splashed water on her face, and put on a little makeup to hide her deathly pallor. She practiced a smile. It was a fragile mask, but it would do. She went downstairs, and the first person she saw was her. Marcella, looking stunning in a flowy dress, a glass of champagne in her hand. She came towards Chloe with a radiant smile. "Chloe, where were you? We were getting worried," she said, trying to hug her. Chloe took a step back, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement to the others, but one that made Marcella stop. "Just needed some air, needed a moment to myself," Chloe replied, the smile fixed on her face. Marcella's gaze flickered for a fraction of a second. "Oh, of course, pre-wedding jitters are normal, but tomorrow is going to be the most perfect day of your life, you'll see." "I have no doubt it will be a day to remember," Chloe countered, looking directly into Marcella's eyes. In that look, she let a tiny spark of the cold fury that consumed her seep out. It was enough. Marcella looked away first, uncomfortable, and took a sip of her drink. The rest of the night was a blur of acting. Chloe chatted, smiled, accepted congratulations, and talked about the baby. Every interaction was a superhuman effort, but she held steady. She acted with a calm that bordered on the supernatural. No one suspected a thing. No one saw the cracks beneath the makeup. No one felt the ice in her heart. She was an actress on the stage of her own tragedy, silently preparing the scene for the final act. Amid the cacophony of forced congratulations, one pair of eyes watched Chloe with a different kind of attention. Bethany, the unintentional architect of this disaster, felt a cold knot in the pit of her stomach. She saw the mask her cousin was wearing. She knew Chloe too well not to notice the stiffness in her smile, the lack of light in her eyes, the way her body held itself ramrod straight like a soldier in enemy territory. When Chloe dodged Marcella's hug, Bethany saw it. When Chloe held her friend's gaze with an unnatural coldness, Bethany understood. Her gut feeling wasn't wrong. The worst had happened. A pang of guilt washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by an apprehensive admiration. Chloe wasn't crying in her room. She was gearing up. Bethany decided then and there in silence that her role was no longer to question, but to support. She would wait. She would be the silent backup for whatever her cousin was planning. Around 10 o'clock, Chloe raised a hand, asking for everyone's attention for a brief moment. The music softened. "My dearest friends, family," she began, her voice sounding incredibly sincere. "Thank you all for being here. My heart is full, but now this bride and her poppy need to rest. I want to look my best for my big day tomorrow." The phrase was met with applause and cheers. The next morning dawned with a clear, unforgiving light. For the world, it was the day of Chloe and Lachlan's wedding. For Chloe, it was the day of reckoning. Her heart didn't beat with a bride's excitement, but with a soldier's adrenaline before battle. The salon team arrived right on time. Hairdresser, makeup artist, masseuse. The house filled with cheerful chatter and the smell of hairspray and cosmetics. Chloe submitted to it all with a robotic passivity. As the masseuse worked on her tense shoulders, she closed her eyes and went over the plan. The tiny, button-sized audio player was already discreetly sewn into the base of her bouquet. The lapel microphone wire snaked invisibly among the stems of the white roses. It was a simple piece of tech, but it would be the most powerful weapon of the day. Her mum entered the room, her eyes welling up. "You're so calm, my daughter. Calmer than me." "I'm at peace, Mum. I'm absolutely sure of what I'm doing," Chloe replied. And it wasn't a lie. When the dress was on and the veil was adjusted, she looked in the mirror. The image that stared back at her was that of a fairy tale bride. Perfect, radiant, serene. But her eyes told a different story. There was a depth there, a steely resolve that didn't match the tulle and silk. It was the tragic beauty of an avenging angel. The car ride to the church was silent. By her side, her dad held her hand, telling her how proud he was. Chloe just nodded, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. With every block they got closer, the adrenaline mounted. Fear and determination waged war inside her. What if she faltered? What if the pain paralyzed her? She squeezed her hand around the bouquet, feeling the hard outline of the little device. No, she wouldn't falter. The music began. The church doors swung open, and there he was at the altar. Lachlan, handsome in his suit, a smug grin on his face. By his side, the groomsmen, and among the bridesmaids, Marcella in an emerald green dress, her face a mask of false emotion. Lachlan and Marcella's eyes met for an instant, a flash of complicity that went unnoticed by everyone except the woman walking towards them. The ceremony unfolded like a fever dream. The readings, the prayers, the priest's words about love and fidelity sounded like a distant, ironic echo. Chloe kept the smile on her face, her eyes fixed on Lachlan. She saw right through him, saw the contempt, the arrogance, the lie. When it was time for the vows, the priest turned to Lachlan, who took the microphone with confidence. He spoke of the day he met her, of how she had changed him, of the blessing that was the arrival of Poppy. Every word was a knife twisting in Chloe's wound. The church guests sighed, moved by the declaration of love. Then it was her turn. The priest handed her the microphone. A hush fell over the room. All eyes were on her, waiting for the loving words of the radiant, pregnant bride. Lachlan looked at her with an expectant smile, the smile of a man waiting for confirmation of his victory. Chloe brought the microphone to her lips. Her hand, hidden by the bouquet, found the small button.
"I also thought our love was a fairy tale,"
she began, her voice clear and firm, echoing through the speakers. "I thought I'd found a man who respected me, who loved our daughter on the way." She paused, letting the emotion hang in the air. "But yesterday, I found out that some fairy tales are, in fact, horror stories in disguise." A murmur rippled through the church. Lachlan's smile faltered, replaced by a look of confusion. Marcella went rigid. "Instead of the vows I wrote," Chloe continued, her voice gaining a steely edge, "I'd like to share with you all the vows my fiancé made yesterday to another woman." And then she pressed the button. The silence of the church was brutally shattered. The uninhibited laughter of a woman, followed by Lachlan's voice. "Easy, babe, easy. You'll wear me out before the big show." A shocked gasp came from the front pews. Lachlan's face turned into a mask of panic and disbelief. He took a step towards Chloe but stopped, frozen by the sound of his own treacherous voice. "And what about the pregnant little bride?" "Oh, Chloe, she believes everything you say. She's the perfect little doll." Marcella's voice, unmistakable, echoed through the sacred space. Chloe's mum brought a hand to her mouth. Her dad's face twisted in fury. Guests turned, looking for the face of the other woman, and their eyes began to land on Marcella, who was pale as a ghost, her chin trembling. "Once the ring is on her finger and my name is on our kid's birth certificate, then, my love, I'll have control over everything." Lachlan's final confession sealed his fate. When the audio ended, the silence that followed was heavier and louder than any sound. It was a silence of horror, of scandal, of pity. Chloe switched off the device. She lifted her chin and looked directly at the broken man in front of her.
"The wedding is off,"
she announced, her voice resonating with an unshakable authority. She turned to the guests, who were watching her with a mix of shock and admiration. "And just so there's no doubt, the woman my ex-fiancé was with yesterday, the woman who called me a doll, is my friend and maid of honor, Marcella." She pointed the bouquet in Marcella's direction. All eyes turned to her, trapped, humiliated. Marcella let out a sob and ran down a side aisle of the church, the sound of her heels echoing her disgrace. Chloe then turned, handed the bouquet and microphone to her stunned dad, and walked back down the aisle, head held high. Bethany followed right behind her and took her hand. She was no longer a jilted bride. She was a queen, leaving behind the ruins of a kingdom of lies. The church doors opened for her, not to a future with Lachlan, but to a future that, for the first time, belonged only to her and her daughter. The instant Chloe turned her back on the altar, the church, previously frozen in shock, exploded into chaos. The silence was replaced by a tumult of whispers, gasps, and the unmistakable sound of chairs scraping across the floor. Lachlan, left at the altar as a monument to his own humiliation, tried to stammer out an explanation, but his voice was swallowed by the noise. Marcella's parents, white with shame, hurried out, while Chloe's parents, after a moment of stunned silence, rushed to their daughter's side. But amidst the pandemonium, another sound stood out. A sound that would define the next phase of everyone's lives. The discreet click of dozens of phones recording. In the digital age, no drama of this magnitude stays private. The guests, still processing the theatrical scene they had just witnessed, were already sharing the videos. Small clips, filmed from different angles, began popping up on social media before Chloe even reached her car. The first post from a younger cousin came with a simple caption. "My cousin is the bravest woman I know." It was enough. The algorithm, hungry for authentic drama, did its job. In less than an hour, the video of the bride who broadcast her fiancé's betrayal at the altar was no longer a family secret. It was a global phenomenon. Hashtags appeared organically, as if born from a collective digital consciousness. Altar revenge, and the most powerful one of all, we're all Chloe. People who didn't know Chloe, who knew nothing about her life, watched those few seconds of the recording and saw something they recognized. The courage to say, enough. They saw a woman who, in her most vulnerable moment, found an unimaginable strength. Chloe, unknowingly, had become a symbol. For Lachlan, the fall was as swift as the video's virality. The next morning, when he woke up from a drunken stupor of despair, the world had already condemned him. The first call was from Richard, Chloe's godfather, who informed him bluntly that he was pulling all his investment. The news spread like wildfire through Sydney's business world. Other investors, fearing association with the scandal and following the lead of a heavy hitter like Richard, followed suit. Contracts were cancelled and business partners distanced themselves. Lachlan's company, built on an image of trust and success, collapsed in a matter of days. The successful family man was now an outcast, his reputation reduced to digital ash. Marcella faced a different kind of hell. The social cancellation was immediate and brutal. Mutual friends blocked her. The bridesmaid group chat excluded her without a word. Her own family, mortified by the public humiliation, treated her with a chilling coldness. She couldn't leave the house without getting dirty looks, without hearing whispers that branded her as the other woman, the fake friend. Unable to bear the weight of the judgment, she packed her bags and vanished, seeking anonymity in another city, leaving behind the wreckage of her social life. Meanwhile, Chloe took refuge in her parents' home, creating a protective bubble for herself and the daughter she carried. She disconnected from the world for a few days, ignoring the hundreds of messages and calls. She needed time to process not just the betrayal, but the woman she had become in the process. The adrenaline of the revenge gave way to a deep exhaustion, and the tears finally came. She cried for the loss of the love she believed in, for the future that had been stolen from her, for the friendship that turned out to be a lie. But amidst the pain, something else began to emerge. Messages from strangers started to pierce her bubble. They were emails, direct messages on Instagram, comments on her friends' posts. "Your courage gave me the strength to leave my abusive husband. I was feeling worthless after a betrayal, but seeing you made me hold my head high. Thank you for showing us we don't have to settle for less than we deserve. Chloe read those messages, one by one, and realized her story was no longer just hers. It had touched a collective wound, given a voice to a pain that millions of women felt in silence. Her pain, exposed so publicly, had become a beacon for others. And it was in that moment that a new idea, a new purpose began to take shape. A week after the non-wedding, sitting in the living room with a calmness she hadn't felt in a long time, she picked up her phone, opened the YouTube app, and hit Create Channel. The name came to her instantly. The Vows I Made to Myself. Her first video was simple, no fancy production, no makeup, just her sitting on the sofa, the light from the window illuminating her face and her prominent baby bump. With a raw, unfiltered honesty, she told everything, from the love that seemed so perfect, to the discovery in the hallway of the penthouse, the silent preparation, and the confrontation at the altar. She didn't portray herself as a hero, but as a hurting woman who decided to fight back. The response was overwhelming. The video hit 1 million views in 48 hours, but more important than the numbers were the comments. The comment section turned into a confessional, a support group. Women shared their own stories of betrayal, of toxic relationships, of overcoming. They didn't just want to consume Chloe's story, they wanted to share their own. Chloe found her new mission. Her channel transformed. She started reading the stories she received, with the author's permission and anonymously, and discussing them, offering not expert advice, but the solidarity of someone who had been there. The following weeks were a whirlwind of contrasting emotions. While the vows I made to myself grew, becoming a phenomenon of sisterhood and mutual support, Chloe's personal life turned inward to the miracle developing in her womb. With every kick, with every movement from Poppy, she remembered the real reason for her fight. It wasn't just for herself, but for her daughter, who deserved to be born into a world where her mother was whole, strong, and the master of her own destiny. The pregnancy, which started as a tool for control in Lachlan's hands, was redefined by Chloe. It became the ultimate symbol of her rebirth. The relationship with her parents, which had always been good, reached a new and touching depth. They saw the strength radiating from their daughter, and admiration replaced pity. Their house, once the stage for a failed wedding party, transformed into a sanctuary of love and anticipation, focused entirely on the arrival of the family's newest member. Poppy's birth was intense, powerful, and transformative. The moment she held her daughter in her arms for the first time, looking at that wrinkly, perfect little face, Chloe felt all the wounds of her past close. The love that flooded her was so overwhelming, so pure, that there was no longer any room for resentment or bitterness. Lachlan, Marcella, the betrayal, all of it became small, insignificant in the face of that immense moment. She had fought for this peace, and now she held it in her arms. Poppy wasn't a reminder of a betrayal, but the living proof of her victory. Motherhood consumed her in the most beautiful way possible. The sleepless nights, the nappy changes, the feeds, each challenge was met with a serenity and a love that surprised everyone. She dedicated herself to Poppy with her whole heart, finding joy in the simplest things. The first smile, the sound of her soft breathing, the warmth of her little body against her own. At the same time, her work on the channel continued to flourish. She filmed videos during Poppy's naps, often with her daughter sleeping in a sling against her chest. This authenticity only brought her closer to her audience. The women who followed her didn't see a distant influencer, but a real mother, a real woman, navigating the joys and challenges of single motherhood while building a career and healing her heart. The channel's success grew beyond YouTube. Invitations started to arrive. first for interviews on podcasts about female empowerment, then for Instagram live sessions with psychologists and couples therapists, where her story served as a starting point for deep discussions about relationships, self-worth, and resilience. Chloe, who had never imagined herself as a public figure, discovered she had a voice and that people wanted to hear it. Chloe's life had found a new, fulfilling rhythm. Her days were filled with the joys of motherhood and the purpose of her work. Poppy grew healthy and giggling, oblivious to the drama that preceded her arrival, and the channel became an increasingly stronger community. But the past, no matter how hard we try to bury it, has a way of crawling back to the surface when we least expect it. And Chloe's past had a name, Lachlan. The first call came from an unknown number. Chloe, used to receiving contacts from PR agencies and producers, answered without hesitation. The silence on the other end was the first red flag. And then, the voice. The same voice that haunted her memories, but now stripped of its arrogance, tinged with a pathetic, whiny tone. "Chloe, it's me." Her stomach went cold. "What do you want, Lachlan? I see you. I see your videos. I see what you've done to me," he began, self-pity dripping from every word. "You destroyed me. You ruined my life, my company, all because of one mistake, one little slip-up. You couldn't have just forgiven me in private. You had to make that circus. You turned me into a monster for the whole world to see, while you act all holy, all heroine." Chloe felt a wave of nausea. The attempt to flip the blame, to play the victim, was so despicable it left her speechless for a moment. "I didn't do anything to you, Lachlan. I just showed everyone who you really are. The words were yours. The actions were yours. Now you have to deal with them." She hung up, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from an old rage she thought she had moved past. But it didn't stop there. Calls from unknown numbers became frequent. Messages from fake profiles appeared on her social media, sometimes accusing her, sometimes begging for a conversation. He started showing up in places she frequented. A glimpse of him across the street from her favorite coffee shop. His car parked a block away from her parents' house. He didn't approach. He just made himself seen. It was a tactic of intimidation, a way of saying, "I'm still here. I can still reach you." Anxiety began to creep into her newly found peace. She tightened her security. She started looking over her shoulder, feeling his shadow hanging over her life. The final escalation came in the form of an official notice. Lachlan had hired a solicitor and was filing for joint custody of Poppy. The document was a masterpiece of manipulation, painting Chloe as an unstable and vengeful woman who used her daughter as a tool for personal promotion, while he was the repentant father, desperate to have a relationship with the daughter he was being denied. The legal battle was draining and ugly, but Chloe had the truth and the proof on her side. Her solicitor, the ruthless Dr. Helen, dismantled every one of Lachlan's arguments. The audio of the betrayal, witnesses to his erratic behavior, and the history of harassment were all presented. The judge, an experienced man, saw through the charade. Lachlan did not get joint custody. Visitation rights were granted, but were strictly supervised and conditional on a psychological evaluation. It was a victory for Chloe, but a bitter one that left her exhausted and emotionally drained. It was after this final defeat in court that Lachlan seemed to finally break. A few weeks passed in silence. The stalking stopped. The calls ceased. Chloe cautiously began to breathe a sigh of relief. Then, one day, he appeared, not hiding across the street, but on the doorstep of her parents' house, standing in the late afternoon sun. He looked different, thinner, defeated, his shoulders slumped. There was no trace of the arrogant businessman anymore. Before her stood only a broken man. Chloe met him on the veranda, asking her parents to stay inside with Poppy. She didn't feel fear, just a deep weariness. They sat in silence for a moment, the same heavy silence that had once existed between them, but now for entirely different reasons.
I'm so sorry,
he said, his voice finally breaking. There are no excuses. What I did was monstrous. What I said about you, about our daughter, was unforgivable. And what I did after, trying to blame you, harassing you, it was the act of a desperate, pathetic man. I lost everything, Chloe, and I've realized I deserved to lose it all. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a regret that for the first time seemed genuine. I didn't come to ask for you back. I know that's impossible. I needed you to hear this from me. I'm so sorry. Chloe listened to him with a calm that surprised him. She watched him not as the man she had loved or the monster who had betrayed her, but as a distant figure from her past. The pain, the anger, the desire for revenge, all of it had been processed, transformed, and finally released.
I know you are, Lachlan,
she replied, her voice soft but firm. And I accept your apology, but I want you to know one thing. She leaned forward slightly, ensuring he understood the gravity of her next words. I forgave you a long time ago, but I didn't do it for you. I did it for myself. I needed to get rid of the weight of the hate so I could be the best mother for my daughter. My heart, which was once yours, is now filled with two things: the immense love I have for Poppy and the self-love I fought so hard to rebuild. She stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. You can see your daughter on the days the judge set. It's your right and it's her right. But other than that, don't contact me again. Our story is over. The forgiveness I gave you was my final act. Now please go. Lachlan looked at her for a long moment, absorbing the finality of her words. He nodded slowly, stood up, and walked away without looking back. As Chloe watched him leave, she felt the last invisible chain binding her to the past break. She was finally and completely free, with the ghost of Lachlan finally exorcised from her life. Chloe felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. Peace was no longer something she had to fight for. It was the air she breathed. Her life settled into a routine of genuine happiness, woven with Poppy's smiles, the warmth of her family, and the fulfilling purpose of her channel, which had surpassed the 100,000 subscriber mark, becoming a source of inspiration and a vibrant community where women found strength in each other. Chloe decided to celebrate this milestone and her new chapter by launching a book. She compiled her reflections, the lessons learned, and the most impactful stories shared by her followers. The title was a tribute to her journey and her mission, The Vows I Made to Myself. The book was an instant hit, not just because of her story, but because it echoed the feelings of thousands of women who, at some point, had to choose themselves. The messages she received daily were a testament to the impact of her work. They were thanks, confessions, and celebrations of small and large victories. Each one was a reminder that her pain had been transformed into a beacon. On a rainy Tuesday, while Poppy, now a chatty little girl of almost 2, slept in her room, Chloe sat down to read the day's emails. One with the subject line, "A vow you helped me make," caught her eye. She opened it. The words she read next made the world stop. Dear Chloe, you don't know me, but I feel like I know you. My name is Helen. 6 months ago, my world fell apart. I discovered the man I was going to marry was not only cheating on me, but had an entire family in another city. The humiliation, the pain was too much. I saw no way out. I saw no future. That night, I decided I didn't want to live anymore. I wrote a goodbye letter. I had everything ready. All that was left was the final step. As I sat there on the floor of my apartment, with my phone in my hand to send one last message to my mum, the algorithm suggested a video to me. The title was "The Bride Who Broadcasted a Betrayal at the Altar." I don't know why I clicked, maybe out of morbid curiosity. And then I saw you. I saw your courage, your pain, your strength. I saw you walking out of that church, not as a victim, but as a queen. And as I watched, something inside me changed. I saw that there was a choice. I saw that the end of one story didn't have to be the end of my life. I watched another one of your videos and then another. I spent the entire night binge-watching your channel, crying. But for the first time in months, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of possibility. That night, because of you, I made a new vow. Not to a man, but to myself. I vowed to live. Today, 6 months later, I'm in another city. I have a new job, and I'm in therapy. There are still tough days, but now I know I'm stronger than them. I wanted you to know this. You didn't just inspire me. You, Chloe, saved my life, and I will be forever grateful. I would love to send my story for your channel and serve as an inspiration for other women too. Chloe finished reading with her face bathed in tears. They weren't tears of sadness or joy, but of an emotion so deep it had no name. She looked out the window at the rain washing the world outside and felt as if her own soul was being cleansed. All the pain, the humiliation in the penthouse hallway, the cold fury, the battle in the church, the harassment, it had all led her to this exact moment. Every painful step of her journey had been a stepping stone so that she could reach out and pull someone like Helen back from the brink. Her pain hadn't just been a burden, it had become her mission. She stood up and went to her daughter's room. Poppy slept serenely, her chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. Her blonde hair formed a halo around her head. Chloe knelt beside the bed and stroked her daughter's face, the tears still silently streaming down her cheeks. In that small being, she saw her entire world. Poppy was no longer just the symbol of her personal rebirth. She was the symbol of all the lives that had been touched, of all the women who had found strength, of all the Helens who had chosen to live. Her daughter was the personification of hope, the living proof that even from the deepest darkness, a new and radiant dawn can always be born. And in that moment, looking at the future that slept peacefully in front of her, Chloe understood that the most important vows are not those we make to others at church altars, but the silent, unbreakable vows we make to ourselves in the sanctuary of our own hearts. And so Chloe's journey shows us that even from the ashes of the greatest disappointment, a woman can rise again, not only to rebuild her own life, but to light the way for others. The stories we share here on our channel are like Chloe's, inspired by many real-life stories of betrayal, separation, and, most importantly, of overcoming. To protect those who trust us, we change names, some situations, and sometimes even the ending, always with the consent of the person who shared their journey. We really want this space to continue to be what it has become, a place of sisterhood, support, and transformation. If you also have a story and feel that sharing it could help others or simply need to be heard, we are here. If you enjoy listening to these stories and believe in their power, I ask you to leave a like on this video. It helps YouTube deliver this message of strength to more people who might need it. And of course, subscribe to the channel to support us and not miss any of our next stories. A big hug and see you in the next video.